Okay, yeah, so we'll provide the recording for this event through an email either by tomorrow afternoon sometime or around like 1 p.m. And if you're interested on the slides that we just went over, the link is there. But just to quickly go over on what hopefully we'll try to cover most of these things. We're basically going to be talking about understanding the files that come with a React project, how JSX elements compare to HTML elements, what functional components are, how to write them, and just a few things, insert in parameters to these components. And then we'll review quickly how to use CSS for React. And then following that, we have a couple of prerequisites if you guys are interested in downloading React on your own time and then using it on your system. The process is a bit lengthy, so we wouldn't recommend you do it now, as it's going to take some time. So that's why we have a link in the React demo section. If you click on this Replit link, you should be taken to the Replit website. Yeah, you should be taken to this website. If you guys don't have an account, quickly make one. It should take no more than 2 to 3 minutes. But since React takes a while to load on your system and there's a lot of steps to it, this is just an easier way for you to quickly begin writing code in React using this online compiler. So if you just click on use template, once you've created an account, of course, just give it a random name and then click on use template. And just like that, you have React installed on this online compiler, and you'll be able to follow along for this demo. This is useful, but we do recommend you, in your own time, install React on your system following the steps on the repository. So I'll give everyone like 2 to 3 minutes to quickly make an account and head over to this compiler. Of the repository or the code? This one or the code? Yes. Oh, VS Code. Okay. Sounds good. Nice. Okay, let's give it 1 more minute to get everyone ready. But just to recap what I said, if you click on this Replit link, it'll take you to a compiler where you'll be able to code online. And then if you click on this, the run button at the very top in the center, we're going to see that this is going to output on the right side. Yeah, so if you write any code on this side, it'll show on the browser. So that's why we're using this for the demo. Well, let's get back to the repository. Okay. All right, so let's get started. Yeah, so we're gonna get started by understanding where the React files being and what some of the folders are used for. So after obviously you've installed, let's take a look at our, if you're on Replit, you go on the left side, there should be a bunch of folders already pre-installed. So we have this node modules folder, and this folder contains every dependency for your project. You don't really need to worry about this project, as if you click on it, it's very confusing. There's a bunch of files, but just know that in order for React to run, we need these packages and dependencies in order for React to run. And there's also screenshots provided just for references. And so after this, there's also a public folder. In this folder, we have a bunch of pictures. So let me run my React code. Okay, it's already running. But yeah, so if you've installed React on your system and you follow the steps and you ran your system, when you first run your app, this is what your browser is going to look like. So that's why if on the public folder you have a bunch of pictures relating to whatever is on your browser. But if you can head back to the repo, The only important file that we're going to be looking into is the index.html file, because in this file we'll be able to 1 second, let me wrap this so we'll be able to see every code. Yes. So the only thing you should worry about in the index.html file is this section, this body section, right here. And this is important because in this div element, here is where your React code is going to run. And React knows that everything should run inside of this code or this part of this page or this file because of this root element. And when we start coding, we'll see how we're going to connect this root element with our JavaScript files. But yeah, just to recap the basic, the only file you really should know is this index.html in the public folder. Moving on, there's also a SRC folder, which stands for source. And this folder is where you'll be writing almost all of your code. Here's where you'll include all of your files and any reusable components that we'll be making. And the most important file in this folder is the index.js. Most of these files that come with the app aren't really necessary. But the file you should focus on is the index.javascript file. And in here is where you'll include your React code. And we'll quickly explain what some of this code does. But just know that the React starts from this file, and every file that you connect after that derives or connects to this file. So that's just something to keep in mind when coding in React. So now let's begin coding. So let's copy this code that we have on the repository, and let's delete everything in our index.js file, and let's paste it inside. And if you haven't noticed already, we're in a JavaScript file. Like I mentioned previously on the slides, all of our code is going to be in this JavaScript file. All right, so just to break this down, we'll first start out with the import, the first line, which is the import React from React file or line. This line isn't really necessary, but it's good practice to include it to let your code editor, in my case, Visual Studio Code, to know that we're importing the React library into this file. This should be in almost all of your JavaScript React files that you'll make. Next line is our import React DOM from React DOM/client. In this line, we're basically importing the React DOM library, which will allow us to create a root and allow us to render a React element from the DOM. In simplified terms, this line allows us to render an HTML file, and you'll see in a bit how we use the React DOM library. So following this, we have this line, const HTML container equals document.getElement by ID. So just to break it down from left to right, now we're writing JavaScript code, right? So we have a const. The const keyword stands for constant, and constant basically means that you're not able to update this variable once it's defined. So like in C++, pretty sure it's just const as well. So same thing here in JavaScript. Next, we have the name of the variable, which is HTML container. It's good practice to obviously always name your variables that you create based on the logic that you're doing. So here we are connecting to the HTML container. Following this, we have equals document, means connect to an HTML file. In our case, we're connecting to the index.html file in our public folder, followed by the built-in function called getElement by ID, and inside we have root. So if you remember, this root keyword is in the index.html file in the public folder. So in that line of code, we're basically connecting this file or this div element to the index.javascript file. So these 3 lines are code that you're always going to need in your index.js file for any React project that you do. And obviously, just let me know if you have any questions. I'll feel free to further explain. But after this, we have the const root equals React DOM.create HTML container line. Same thing. this variable is going to be constant. The name is root. This time we're using the library that we imported in the second line. So we're saying connect to React DOM and then create root to this container. So just to further connect the index.html file up here with the JavaScript index.javascript file. And then finally, the way to render this code to our browser is to write root. We created this variable up here on line 5, and we say render this root with the JSX tag h1, and then inside say hello world. So if we go to our browser, now we see that we have the hello world line in our browser. So if we were to write something else here like hello everyone, our browser will automatically update. So this is almost all the code that you're going to need when creating React projects in your index.js file. But if we continue with the demo, now we're going to be going over what JSX elements are and how they're similar to regular HTML elements. So JSX is a HTML-like syntax that you can use in React. So for example, in this line of code, we have a h1 tag, and this looks the exact same as a HTML h1 tag, but in React, it's not a HTML element, it's a JSX element. React is just weird like that, but that's just something to keep in mind. They're very similar, but they're not the same, but they're used almost the exact same way. I know it's a bit confusing, but if we copy this code here, and we replace it with these few lines, if we run it, let's see what our output is on our browser. So we have a line of hello world followed by hi again. Same thing. We have a JSX div tag, very similar to a regular div tag in HTML. Is that what we want to pick?
So I basically want to see whether the difference between the HTML page code, which is the HTML code, versus the JavaScript React JS code, which should be very similar to each other. That's all.
Yeah. Yeah, JSX almost the same exact thing as regular HTML tags.
I think they didn't get rid of that. They
Yeah.
didn't get rid of the standalone HTML.
Yeah, it's just building on top.
Yeah, it's just building on top of that, which is really neat. It's definitely really neat.
Yeah, and that's why React is a framework, so it just builds on top of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, rather than creating a whole new programming language to do what React does. Okay, yes. So another example of JSX elements. So let's say if we deleted this div tag, or we just commented it out. Typically in a regular HTML file, these two lines wouldn't give you an error. It would output hello world, hi again. But with React, you are required to include either your code in the index.js file with a div element or this JSX. Yeah, so let me copy this code. Yeah, so now we don't have an error. If we comment this, we're gonna get an error. So just something to keep in mind is when writing React code, you always include your elements inside of this like tag. Let's see if we have his name here. Here we have. Yeah, so this tag is similar to a div tag, but in React it's called a fragment tag. So just always in your index.js file, include your elements here, your JSX elements inside of a fragment tag or a div element tag. So let me include it on a div element tag, just so we don't get an error anymore. So now if we check our browser, yeah, no errors. Okay. Yeah, so that's basically the very basics of the very first file that you're going to use in your React project, which is the index.javascript file. Now onto functional components. Let's copy this code and let's break it down. So yes, in your index.js file, delete everything on it, then paste everything under functional components. So let me quickly organize this. Okay. Okay, so I know you guys probably seen a couple of differences. So first lines, same lines as we mentioned before. Always code that you must include with your index.javascript file. But here we have an example of a component. So to create a component, it's a function in JavaScript. To define a function, you first write the function keyword followed by the name of the function. Name anything you want, and then parentheses. We're not including parameters yet, so we're not gonna pass in any parameters, but then we open a bracket, and inside, the difference is we have to write the return keyword followed by parentheses. And at the end of the parentheses in the return keyword line, you always must include a semicolon. Because this is JavaScript, so JavaScript code, lines of code always end in semicolons, similar to C++. And inside here is where you would include JSX or HTML like tag syntax. So let me delete this and let's review this. So here we have a function keyword followed by the name of the function. And then we're returning this element. So every time we call this component, we're gonna output everything inside of the return keyword. And here we have a div element followed by an h1 tag and a paragraph tag that says the following text. And then this line 14 stays the same, line 15 stays the same. We're creating a container and then a root. And then we always have to render it. So we have to do root.render. And here we have a class list. So now if we run our file, we look at the compiler, we see the elements of this component. So as you see here, welcome to the Computer Science Society Club, and same exact code from the H1 tag and list of club members, same thing as the paragraph tag.
Good question. For root render, does it connect to the index.html?
Yeah, so that's what's happening in line 14. We're getting the element by ID root, which is the element or the ID and the div element in the index.html found public, as we see here. But just to continue, let's say if we wanted to, if there was an incident in our code where we wanted to use this component that we've created multiple times. So let's scroll down a little and let's copy this. And let's remove all the code in our index.html file and then paste this. So here we have the exact same code, but we're using our component multiple times. So you see how rather than writing this multiple times inside of our root.render line, rather than doing this multiple times, we can just include the reusable component like this syntax multiple times. So if we look at our browser, now we see the syntax. We see our components used 5 times. So this is our first component, second component, third, fourth, and fifth. So that's basically how we create a reusable component and why it's beneficial to use them. Okay, let's see.
It definitely saves a lot of time than, having to write out all of this H1 tag, the paragraph tag.
Yeah, and then also, if you noticed again, we have the fragment line. And inside we have components or code. Because without this, we'll get an error if we remove it. So it always has to be in a fragment tag and or a div tag. Up to you which you'd like to use. Well, so let's practice more with this just so we get the hang of it. So let's copy this line of code. In here, it's just a little bit more complex example, but we could break it down. So let's copy that and let's paste it in our index.js file. Okay, let me grab this. Okay. So we have same component that we just used, the class list component, which is whenever we call the function, it's going to output this in our render code. So we have one component up here, and then we have a second component called student info, follows the same format, function keyword, name of the function, parentheses because it's a function, and then the bracket, and inside we have the return keyword, followed by parentheses, and at the end we include a semicolon. But inside now we have a div element or div JSX, and this is going to return a student's name. So I use my name here. My name, I included a list. A list is basically what this is going to output in this line of code. And an order list followed by a list. And then the strong element just boldens the text. So strong, the end of strong. So this will be boldened in our text as we see here. And then, yeah, a bunch of code of JSX HTML-like code. And if we look to where we render this code, we have the class list component, and we have the new student component that we just made up here. So the first thing that our browser is going to render is this class list, which is this line, which is this, and then our student info component is going to render list of club members. So since we created a reusable component, we could use this as many times as we want. And it's basically just going to copy it again on our browser. So that's the use of functional components. Let me know if you have any questions. We could maybe do another example. But if not, we can continue. Okay, so now we're going to learn how to pass in parameters to components. So let's copy this code. Again, we're going to delete everything in our index.js file and paste it on here. And then let's try to break this down. Okay. Yeah, we also have a screenshot of what your output will look like once you insert in this code. Okay. So hopefully you guys see some differences. The first difference is the difference that you guys probably see is this new parameter that we passed in student info. So like any programming language, you can name your parameter anything you want. You can name it help, anything. I just named the test. I just named the item for this. So this is how you pass in the parameter. And now how do we use this parameter to display various types of data, which we'll see in a second. So in React, in order to access the parameter, you have to use it in brackets like this. So anywhere in your code, in your JSX element, if you want to call your parameter, you have to include it in a bracket. We call the name of the parameter, which is item. And what do we want to pass in here? I want to pass in a student name. So let's keep it like that for now. And then I also want to pass in a student's last name. So let me uncomment this. So now when we call our student info component, you're going to see how we define the two types of data that we want to pass in, student name and last name. You're going to see how we can use this component to display a different set of data, but following a similar format inside of the code. So in here, just another example of data we want to pass in. So I want to pass in an ID for a specific student. Same format, bracket, name a parameter, dot, the name of the data that's going to be passed in. So now knowing that, if we go over to where we render, so where we go over where we call the student info function. We first call the student info function inside of the class list component. So we've seen this before. Now the only difference is wherever we call student info here. Let me just expand this a bit. So whenever we call this component, we have the student info component that we define up here. And we've included a parameter. But inside of our code, we said that we want to pass in a student name. We want to pass in a student last name. We want to pass in ID, a school name, and a major name. So in order to define that in a student component, simple as this. So let's say we have to use the exact same data name. So we call the student name. So let's copy that inside of the component. You do the name of the data you want to pass in equals, and here's where you pass in what name you want to give the student. So I'm just going to say Bob here. And then we also want to pass in the student last name. So let's copy that. Space, name of the data we want to pass in equals, and then pass in the student last name. Yeah, Bob Harry. And we also wanted to pass in an ID. So same thing. Let's give this student an ID of 21. And then we'll just do one more. We'll do the school. We want to pass in a school for this student. Equals, in quotation marks, John Jay College. Let's see why we're getting an error. Oh, nice catch. Yeah. Oh, we never forget the backslash. So now if we go to our browser, let's see what's output. So before we check that out, when this renders, we should display the name Bob, Harry, the ID, and the school name. But in these two components, we didn't pass in any data. So we shouldn't be seeing any data whenever we see on these two components rendering in a browser. So let's go to our browser. Yep. Okay. Yeah. So here we have the Welcome to Computer Science Society Club, and that's inside of the classes component up right here, followed by a list of club members. And that's inside of this PJSX tag. And here's where we have the data that we just passed in. You see the same thing, Bob, Harry, the ID of this specific student, and the school name for this student. And here we have two more examples. As we see here, we have a student info, but we have no data for them. So if we want to pass in data, follow the same structure. I'm just going to pass in a student name just for the sake of time. So let's pass that in. I'm going to say Mary. And then now we should display the data. It should be displaying. Let's see, why is it not? Sorry. Oh, I was expecting it to be an idea thing. Yeah, so it's right there. Yeah, so that's how you pass in specific data and how you reuse components. So let's just do one more example. Let's see what we could do. Let's create a quick component called professor. Parentheses, let's open up this. Never forget the return keyword by parentheses, and at the end we include a semicolon because this is JavaScript. And then just to stay organized, I'm going to include everything inside of this. So if you remember, always include your elements inside of a div tag or a fragment tag, which is just this. So, and here I want to pass in professor name. So let's do an H1 tag. And I'm gonna say professor name. And then since we want to reuse this, we're gonna include a parameter. Let's call the item as well. And in order to pass in data for this, we must include it in brackets, call the name of the parameter, what data we want to display. I'm just gonna say professor name. Now I want to render this component inside of, let's do it below list of, let's do it after student info. So let's say professors. And then after this, I want to include this professor component. So in order to call this component, we name the professor. And we do not want this. And now in order to pass the data, I'm going to call the name of the data we want to pass. I call the professor name. And then I'm going to say Professor Kumar. And now if we look at our browser, we see it rendered right here, professor name Kumar R. Yes, so any questions about that, just let me know. And we could do another quick example, but that's the basics of how you reuse these components with new data for each. So let's do one more. Let's say another professor's name. What's the professor's name? Hunter Johnson. And it should be displayed right here. Yep. So now let's go back to our repo. Let's see. Yep. Yeah, everything here, just for reference, you guys feel free to check that what's in the description here. If not, let's continue with using how do we style our browser to make it more user friendly and pleasing to the eyes. So this is where now we're going to look into how we can stylize our website using CSS. So for this, every file already comes, well, every project comes with a CSS file for the index.javascript file. So if we go to our source folder, we already have an index.css file. So let's head over to our index.css file and let's delete everything in there and let's copy what's on the repo. And let's paste it. If you're not familiar with CSS, the typical format of how you could include style to tags is you do the name of your tag or the class of your tag. I'm just going to do test here, bracket, and then you could stylize whatever you want to do to this element. If you want to increase the size of it, or if you want to include color to it, you want to give a color, you could do any color, or yeah, you could do a bunch of stuff with CSS. So here I created three classes, member name, school, and club name, right? So now let's head back over to our index.js file. In our index.js file, let's copy the code that we have right below the CSS. So let's delete everything in index.js and let's paste this. Also, in order to connect our index.css file that we just added to our index.js file, we have to import it just like, so yeah, just for the connection's sake. Same thing like we did with the import React and import React DOM for connecting the root ID to this file. Well, it's the format for this. So in order to connect the file that's in the same folder, so we know they're in the same folder because they're under the source file. So we do import in quotation marks. We do import quotation marks / the name of the file. Yes. Yeah. So that's now we'll be able to use anything we've added in their index.js file inside of our index. So anything we add in the index.css file to our index.js file. So the code is already here, but if you, let's say I wanted to use this member name of that gives this element a font size of 30 px, 30 pixels. In order to give this specific element this style, we have to do class name. So typically in HTML, when working with vanilla HTML and CSS, you would just do class equals the name of the class, but with React, you have to do class name. And inside you would include the class name. We named it member name. So let's connect it to this element. We do member name. And now whatever data's in here is going to have a font size of 30 pixels. So let's go to our browser. And yeah, so you see how the size increased. So now let's remove this. Now it should go back to its default size. So because we added CSS to this member class name of increasing its size to 30 pixels, that's why it's being displayed and rendered. Just another example of this. Here under where we show the school name, we've included a class style for this element, and we named the school. So if we go to index.css, we have a school class, and the style for this class is just make the text dark blue. So we call this class here, same format, class name equals in quotation marks the name of the class. So class name school, and now anywhere where the school's name is, it's going to be blue, as we see here. So if we remove it, it'll go back to the regular default color, which is black. But yeah, that's basically how you connect CSS to JavaScript and how you can make your UI more pleasing to the human eye. Yeah, so any questions about that before we wrap up?
Any questions?
Yeah, just let me know in the chat for anyone on Zoom.
All
So,
good? Okay, awesome.
yep.
Oh, cool. Go on. So,
Yes.
you can put it through your website, yeah, and you can do with database. We have website for volume, how to do that, and how to create that.
Oh, that's much more difficult.
I would imagine that you will need to connect it to the database of your choosing through some kind of code that provides you.
Yeah, I recommend using Postgres or maybe Firebase, but Postgres is probably the most common ones people use. And then yeah, you will need to create like routing for it and then log in. You have to implement or import a bunch of packages for that. Yeah, it's much more difficult.
A lot,
Yeah, Node.
a lot of factors.
But yeah, that's basically it for the demo. We've included a bunch of resources in this repo if you want to learn more about React. You want to get a more in-depth breakdown of everything we did today and more. We've included a link to an 11-hour React free course. If you want to build your own React website, or if you're a visual learner, we included a YouTube video as well. So the resources are there if you're interested in that. And we'll also paste the recording in our Discord and through email tomorrow. But just to continue this, we wanted to save some time, so that's why we did a short demo today, just to get back to it. So this was our last event of the semester. But just to quickly recap what we did through this entire semester, we first had our first general meeting where we introduced all events we wanted to do. Then we had our career prep workshop where we talked about various computer science and cybersecurity resources. So all the information or any resource we talked about that is in our GitHub repository. And afterwards, we had an introduction to using Git and GitHub. And these are important tools that you'll be using once you get out in the field, especially if you get into software development. And afterwards, we had our first ever cybersecurity event for this semester or for the club's history. So we know a lot of you guys are interested in cybersecurity, so we are going to be implementing more cybersecurity events for next semester. And we'll also be sending out a form on what event you guys would like to see. or any other programming languages you guys were want us to look into and do. And afterwards, we had an iOS development workshop where we built a simple tip calculator app, as we see here, using Swift and Xcode. And then recently we had a captured a flag workshop where Israel and Brian did a great breakdown on what capture the flags are, and they also did a bunch of demos. On the recording for that is also in our GitHub repository and on our website. And then we concluded with our React workshop today. Yeah, so that's a quick recap of the semester. And then we have a couple, before we get to club announcements, we just wanted to say a big farewell to everyone who's graduating this semester. Good luck on your career, and yeah, and anyone who's graduating next semester, we'll see you guys next semester. But now for club announcements, I'll pass it over to Annie.
Right. Hi there, it's me again. So on to club announcements. We are holding a party, a holiday party with none other than Prism. And so the date will be on Tuesday, December 13th. Time will be the same thing during the community hour, 1:40 p.m. to 2:55 p.m. Where will be in the same location, Heron Hall 200. We do encourage all of you to attend. This will be a great time, to relax before the chaotic finals, network, eat lots of we will have lots of different foods, and this is a great chance to meet and talk with your fellow peers. At the end, we will give out merch. Yay! So we will be giving out hoodies and tote bags. So we look forward to see you all there.
Yeah, so that's it for today. We have the room until 2:50, so you feel free to stay. We have a bunch of food left over, and soda. So yeah, thanks everyone for a great semester, and we'll see you guys next semester.
And I'm the group. I love the way you guys put this together. So my feedback was, I want to use a format where when you're increasing this topic, you're actually using a sample code instead of starting from scratch. Because we pretty much covered the JavaScript, CSS, HTML, functions, parameters in 1 hour, right? That would be possible for the sample code. Otherwise, we start begin with some paragraphs and that'll take a while. So we have this talent pipeline that we have to do. I don't know if you guys have started on the boot camp.
Yeah, I did a boot camp too.
So you notice that HTML for 1.5 hours and we come out and all you know is very small, right? That was because we start from scratch. Instead of that, if we start on by assuming that we will do the sample code, we build out the code in the boot camp. Okay. Yeah. Thanks for that.
Of course, thanks.
Thank you. Oh, as a challenge, if you're feeling quite ambitious and would like to go beyond what we provided in today's workshop, we do challenge you to build up a website with React. And feel free to post it on social media.
Oh, we also get one big picture.
In one big picture.
I'll take it. Nice, thanks for. Hey, how you doing?
Yeah, yeah. There's certain one as
Yeah,
React
they're
Native.
able to make it for the videos.
You just start sometimes a little bit different. But this is just regular React Native. But so it's also React Native.
Oh, okay. So, over there.
Yeah, yeah. That's what I'm React Native. Website. Mobile, it's sweat, it's sort of-
Yeah, it's all sorts of brand. Yeah, so I think the first my space. Okay, well, yeah, not probably though. I really want that. Oh yeah, they said appreciate it. Yeah. Then I thought the CD was up really hard though. And it's important. Yeah, that was funny because like there's so many.
See you guys.
And I feel like you're not on spot.